This is a walkthrough of the Innovator settlement application. So if you're applying for indefinite leave to remain as an Innovator founder or innovator. So let's make a start. So this is the first part of the form. It asks, are you currently in the UK? Remember, you need to be in the UK to make this application. And importantly, you're going to be effectively landlocked until a decision is made on your application. Because if you leave the UK after submitting the application, which means submitting the online form, then the application is deemed to be withdrawn. Now, that might not necessarily come to the attention of the Home Office if you leave, but it would certainly come to their attention when you attempt to come back in and you'd made an application. It would have been deemed to be withdrawn. You would lose Section 3C leave if you've exceeded your original visa. And so basically you need to plan on the basis that you've got to be in the UK. Now, how long, therefore, is it going to take? You need to know. Well, some of my recent applications have taken less time. They've been very quick indeed. I'm talking like a few days or a week. But most applications take longer because there's effectively an interview process. So the interview process takes place by email. Usually, they will send you a series of questions. You have to answer them. You get 10 working days or 10 calendar days, depending on each occasion. And so that process can take a while. Plus, you have to then consider your responses and so on. So this is just a sort of a sample application, dummy application with placeholder details. So are you currently in the UK? Yes. Do you have an application with the Home Office? You won't have another application with the Home Office. Something unusual has taken place. Continue. Now, we're going to go to the application details. Again, these are just purely placeholder fictional details. So which immigration permission were you most recently granted? Innovator. And here, it just gives you Innovator. It doesn't give the option of Innovator founder. So Innovator is the generic term, it seems to be on this current form. This form has a number of mistakes, by the way, within the form itself, which I'll go through and highlight. So you'll give your name, contact, address. Is it a UK address? And then you'll give your bio details, passport number, etc. And then the endorsement, the details of who provided you with the endorsement, and those should be on your endorsement letter. And by the way, I have seen endorsing bodies getting the endorsement letter itself wrong, in which case it doesn't fit the formal requirements. That can hold up the process or even lead to a refusal. And you need to point them to the latest version of the endorsing body guidance to make sure that it meets the formal requirements. Now, one thing is meeting the formal requirements, but what about the merits of the case? Again, your endorsing body can mess up the endorsement letter in a number of ways. So be super careful about that. I've seen endorsing bodies using the wrong endorsement letter or the content causing problems which were avoidable. Does your endorsement letter confirm you've made progress developing the business against the mandatory criteria? Yeah, and this is where I find that there can be points arising about, well, did you do the original business idea or did you pivot the business idea, and then have you made progress against the new business idea? Now, what sometimes happens is they ask for a new business plan just before you apply for indefinite leave to remain, perhaps to formalize a previous pivot in the business, and you produce a new business plan. But then the question is, well, have you made significant progress against that business plan? In other words, the new one, to which the answer can be no. So sometimes it's best with the amendment to the business plan, if you are amending the business plan to update it, which might be sensible, I'll explain why in just a moment. But if you are doing that, then what I usually do with my clients is have that as an annex to the original business plan. In other words, to make it clear that the original business plan hasn't substantively changed, if that's the case, and it's just an update, an annex, and then you can produce the original business plan with the update, and then you don't get into this confusion. Because if you amend the original business plan, that triggers the Home Office to ask, well, have you made significant progress against this new business plan? And the reason why I say it's sensible to have an update to the business plan, I'd say in a lot of cases, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, is that when you apply for indefinite leave to remain using this form, you are also making an application for an extension. By that I mean that if they refuse you for indefinite leave to remain, when you've applied for it, they've still got to consider you for an extension. So if they find, for example, you haven't met the success criteria, then they've still got to consider the extension application. Fine, have you met all the other criteria? Now, for both extension and indefinite leave to remain, you need to show that you've made significant progress against the business plan, however. So So that's basic to both. Plus, the genuineness considerations are common to both as well. So basically, if the Home Office believes you haven't made significant progress against the business plan, whatever the endorsing body says, then you'd be refused for both an indefinite leave to remain and the extension. But they must consider you for both. So the reason I say it's sensible to have an updated business plan is that if you're, in some cases, is that if you're refused indefinite leave to remain, but you're granted an extension, then the next time you apply for indefinite leave to remain or for an extension, you're going to be judged against the updated business plan rather than the original ones. So if there's some problems with the original ones, with the original business plan, it's best to fix those so that when you apply now, if ultimately you're only going to be granted an extension, then you'll be judged then against the milestones that you've set out in the update, which, as I say, are ordinarily put in an annex. Then it asks which two of the success criteria you're going to rely on. Now, I mentioned mistakes with the form. They still haven't fixed this form. It says, look, the business has generated a minimum revenue of 50,000 in the accounts with at least 100,000 from exporting overseas. Now, that's wrong. The law says it's 500,000. That should read 500,000. So they need to fix that. And I've had a few cases recently where my clients have gone for 500K plus doubling number of customers plus 50K plus significant R&D. In fact, in one of my recent cases, we went for everything, save for one of the employment criterion, because my client had done everything. But you only need two, of course, the most common, of course, being 50, that you've invested 50K, actively spent it, and you've done significant R&D and applied for IP protection, not a trademark, remember. Trademarks don't count. So when you've selected those will go into the form. And then, when did you first arrive in the UK? And this is where we get, and this is a really important point. It says in the last 3 years, if you spend more than 150 days outside of the UK in any 12-month period. Now, either that's an error or the relevant threshold in law is 180 days. Or it's that they want to apply greater scrutiny. If you spent more than 150 days out, then they want to have a closer look at it. In other words, have a look at your calculation. Now, what I do is a very careful calculation with an Excel spreadsheet with the right formula, not counting the day that you left and the day that you came back in. And you need to look at it carefully on a 180-day basis. I have had a number of clients who've been over it, and I've still got them through. I did it. My last video was about that, how you can, the points you need to bear in mind. But where there's COVID absences, then generally there's a doctor's letter. The doctor's letter should say something, if this is the case, to the effect that you were unable to return to the UK in the circumstances. Plus, use the Wayback Machine to check what the relevant government sites were saying at the time on what the guidance was. Then travel history. You put in your travel history. Again, calculation of absences here is important. Partners details. You've got to do the Life in UK test. Life in UK test, one of the biggest or main series about this on YouTube, where you can just listen to me go through the content that you need to know for the Life in UK test. As long as you don't get sick of my voice, that might be helpful for you. I've had dozens and dozens of people who've messaged me saying that YouTube series was super helpful. So you can listen to the content for the Life in UK test. You can take some sample tests online to make sure you're up to speed, and then buy the book from. There's actually a set of 3 books that come as one on Amazon with the materials, a guide, and then the sample questions. So I would buy that set from Amazon and give yourself a bit of a lead-in period to take the Life in UK test. Then a lot of people are taken by surprise on this. So it says, look, what are your annual earnings? Now, if you're a self-employed director, you may be, or you might have an employment contract with your company. Usually you're going to be CEO and founder, and not everyone is paying themselves anything yet in their business. So I have not had issues so far with where people have been either not paying themselves or paying themselves a very small amount. But I think it's been rare that people are paying themselves nothing in terms of dividend and salary. So I think it's sensible to pay yourself something, right? And to have maybe put that in place ahead of the point that you put in the form. I think it just shows commercial reality in the business. Assuming there is commercial reality, right, and you can pay yourself, then I think paying yourself something goes some way to show that, look, this is. You've got started, you're making significant achievements under your original business plan, but there may be good reason why you're not paying yourself anything. And when did you start working on this business? Usually that will be the incorporation date, but not exclusively. There are cases where people have incorporated before applying for the Innovator visa. So consider carefully what you're going to put in there about the first date. Then there's the conduct matters. Hopefully you haven't overstayed, etc. Be careful about public funds, claiming benefits, etc. Usually applying for government grants is not going to be applying for public funds. So you should be careful about that. If you have applied for public funds, you've probably breached the immigration rules. So usually the answer to this will be that that no, you've not applied for them. These are the different public funds. So I would not apply for any of these, to be clear, but given the conditions of the visa. So back, have you applied for any public funds? The answer should be no. And then what is the end date of your most recent visa? Now, in terms of applying, I'd usually get the endorsement letter, say 2.5 months or so before your visa expires. It can't be sooner than that, right? Otherwise you might not be able to apply, but you can apply 28 days for, in terms of the Home Office application, 28 days before the visa expires. So you'd want clearly you need to have been endorsed first, but the endorsement can be a bit earlier. Plus the endorsing bodies might need a long lead-in time as well. So I'm usually working with people about 6 months before they have to apply. And then we can get the endorsement letter sorted out, settlement endorsement letter sorted out properly, and then have a civilized amount of time to then prep the ILR application and submit it. Now, some people don't seem to realize that the dependents have to apply for an extension, right? You're applying now at year 3 usually, but your dependents need 5 years. So they're applying for extensions at this point. So when you submit this application on their applications, I'm going to do a video about this shortly. In other words, Innovator dependents, on their application forms, they should be citing the correct UAN for your application to link the two. So if you click on download PDF, then on it actually gives the UAN even before you submit it and before you complete the declaration. So yeah, that's important. Also, in terms of supporting documents for the Innovator ILR application, if you have completed this form and you click continue, then you've got the document section. And on the document section, look, it just asks for your passport. Now, that's just flat wrong, because there's a whole bunch of stuff you'll need to provide with your application. The Life in the UK test. You'll need to include your BRP, the endorsement letter itself. The form doesn't even ask for the settlement endorsement letter, which is the most important document. You'll need proof of your residence. I usually submit council tax bills, utility bills, ideally covering the whole period. You'll also want some proof in terms of when you came in and out of the country, together with a schedule. And I usually do a declaration and a cover letter, depending on the circumstances. You need some. You have to enter the reference for Life in UK test, but I usually include the email where you got that confirmation of the Life in UK test. I put that in, and there's other additional documents depending on the circumstances of the case. So the form doesn't really work to that extent. It only asks for your passport, and if you don't provide this other documents that I'm talking about, then it's going to lead to delays in your application. On the one point on the timing for the application is that you can apply for the priority service or super priority service or just standard service. If you apply for standard service, then it could take months. If you apply for the priority service, then you're going to get a week before the first response, and super priority 1 day before the first response. But that first response is not necessarily going to be a decision. It could be, hey, we need some more time to consider your application. And by the way, can you provide X, Y, Z? Normally they say, hey, we need some time to consider your application. And then about a week later, even on priority or super priority, then you'll get, can you explain X, Y, Z? I've done a separate video about what they actually ask you at that point, which is, all the different things they ask, which are primarily geared towards, look, have you done the business yourself, or have you outsourced it to a separate software development company? Like, who developed the app, and is it being used? And in terms of the money that you're paid, were you paid for the innovative thing that you were endorsed for, or were you paid for ancillary work and activity outside of that? And all of that to consider day-to-day involvement, but also genuineness, and then also significant achievements judged against the business plan. Now, if you rely on the financial criteria, they'll ask for all of the invoices, and it's a big package that you produce. So there's a secondary tranche of documents that you'll be providing them, but that's after the initial submission. But as I say, if there's something wrong with the initial submission in terms of supporting documents, then that in itself will independently cause delays. So that's to be avoided. And for those of my clients who've had COVID-related delays, or they've been out for 180 days for other reasons, then there's a whole separate set of considerations to go over. So the form is pretty inadequate, right? At the time of making this video, it's it's really flawed and unhelpful to applicants. So do be careful with it. Bear in mind the points that I've made there, and yeah, best of luck with your application. Just one thing on financial planning, going back to this point I made about dependents, that because you are applying for ILR, you're not having to pay the NHS surcharge, but your dependents will, right? If you've been in for 3 years, they've been in for 3 years, they need 5 for their own ILR, then they need to pay the NHS surcharge for the rest of their stay. And there's some further quirks in the application form. When you continue to the next stage, I've done a separate video about this basically, which is that you have to, it asks you on the dependent forms, well, what's the end date that the main applicant's applying for? Well, there's no end date because you're applying for indefinite leave to remain. So on that, I would calculate usually 3 years minus 1 day, and that should give you the accurate calculation for the NHS surcharge, but you still need to budget for that, right? So especially if you've got, 1, 2, 3, 4 children, then it can really add up to a very significant amount. So you need to take that into account in terms of your general budgeting for the application. So, because it's certainly not cheap, especially once you add on the ILR fee as well. Thanks. Best of luck in my next video. I'm going to go through the Dependent Innovator extension form, so you know what to do with it, any partners and family that you have. Bye for now.